The most decisive strike in a modern war does not always come from a bomber. Sometimes it comes from silence. No explosion, no smoke column, no crater, no flashing footage from a targeting pod, no statement from the Pentagon, no dramatic satellite image released at dawn, no triumphant announcement that a command bunker has been destroyed or a missile battery has been erased. Just a line of communication going dark beneath the water. That is the story beneath the Persian Gulf. On the surface, the Gulf looks like a familiar arena of military tension. Patrol boats, drones, tankers, radar sites, carrier groups, missile batteries, air defense networks, fast attack craft, commercial ships moving cautiously through one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. The visible battlefield is already dangerous enough, but the deeper battlefield is underwater. That is where the quiet war lives. Beneath the Persian Gulf, below the shipping lanes, below the patrol patterns, below the radar horizon, there is another kind of infrastructure. Cables, sensors, military communication routes, undersea nodes that connect command centers to forward positions, hidden systems that allow orders, coordinates, targeting information, encrypted instructions, and naval coordination data to move faster than any radio broadcast and more securely than most surface links. Modern militaries do not fight only with ships, planes, and missiles. They fight with networks. And if you can disturb the network at exactly the right point, at exactly the right time, you do not need to destroy the whole fleet. You can create confusion, delay, blindness, and uncertainty inside the command structure that tells the fleet where to go, what to target, when to fire, and how to respond. That is why the mission described in the source is so important. It is not about 4 men underwater. It is about the future of war itself. The story begins with a simple strategic truth. Iran's naval power in and around the Strait of Hormuz depends on coordination. The fast boats that harass shipping do not operate in isolation. The drones that watch the waterway do not simply appear by instinct. The coastal radar sites, command centers, maritime surveillance units, and IRGC naval elements all depend on communications architecture. Remove or disrupt that architecture, and the entire machine becomes slower, less confident, and easier to read. The target, according to the source, was not a civilian internet cable. It was a military communications line tied to a specific command function. That distinction matters. In a conflict where global shipping, energy markets, and civilian life are already under pressure, the difference between indiscriminate disruption and precise military action is everything. A civilian communications cut can create chaos. A military node disruption can create leverage. The alleged objective was narrow: isolate a specific command channel long enough to affect Iran's ability to coordinate naval operations in the Strait of Hormuz. Not to black out an entire country, not to damage civilian systems, not to create public panic. The purpose was to deny one part of the Iranian military machine its most secure path for transmitting orders. That is the kind of operation that almost never appears in official history until decades later, if it appears at all. Because the entire point is that no one is supposed to know. In popular imagination, warfare is loud. Fighter jets screaming overhead, missile launches in the night, explosions lighting up the horizon, commanders giving dramatic orders, news anchors showing maps, analysts explaining strike packages and radar ranges. That version of war is real but incomplete. The most sophisticated militaries also fight in absence. They create missing signals. They create unexplained delays. They create systems that fail at the worst possible moment. They create doubt inside the enemy's command room. They create a technical problem that looks like age, weather, corrosion, mechanical fatigue, or bad luck. That is the beauty and danger of the undersea domain. It is hard to see, hard to prove, hard to defend, and hard to explain to the public. When a missile hits a radar site, everyone understands what happened. When a secure undersea cable fails, the first reaction is uncertainty. Was it an accident? Was it age? Was it poor maintenance? Was it seabed movement? Was it a fishing trawler? Was it an anchor? Was it sabotage? Was it a hostile state? Was it an internal failure? Was it a warning? Was it a coincidence? That uncertainty is not a side effect. It is the weapon. The mission in the source is built around that uncertainty. The team is inserted not to create visible damage, but to create a failure that looks ordinary enough to be accepted by the enemy's repair crews. That is the key. The operation is not successful simply because a cable stops working. It is successful if the enemy cannot immediately prove why it stopped working. In other words, the target is not only the cable. The target is the explanation. If Iran can prove the line was deliberately attacked, it gains a political weapon. It can accuse Washington, it can rally domestic anger, it can justify retaliation, it can tell allies and partners that its sovereignty was violated, it can escalate publicly. But if the cable appears to have failed naturally, Iran is trapped in a different problem. Its military command node loses secure communications, but its public narrative is weaker. It may suspect sabotage, it may even be certain privately, but suspicion is not the same as proof, and without proof, escalation becomes harder to justify. That is how a silent operation can create operational advantage without forcing immediate political escalation. This is the logic of gray zone warfare. It exists between peace and open war, between accident and attack, between intelligence operation and military strike. It is designed to shape conditions without triggering the full consequences that visible force can bring. States use it because the modern world is full of critical systems that can be affected quietly. Fiber optic cables, pipelines, satellite links, port software, radar relays, logistics databases, sensor networks, drone control channels, and maritime tracking systems. The surface fleet may look powerful, but the invisible network is often the real nervous system. That is why undersea infrastructure has become one of the most important security problems of the 21st century. Civilian economies depend on undersea cables for data. Energy systems depend on seabed pipelines and offshore infrastructure. Military systems depend on secure, hardened, and redundant communications. Modern societies are built on physical lines that most people never see. A cable on the seabed is not just a cable. It is a pressure point. In the Persian Gulf, that pressure point becomes even more important because geography compresses everything. The Gulf is narrow, shallow in many areas, crowded with shipping, filled with energy infrastructure, surrounded by hostile or tense military positions, and connected to global markets through the Strait of Hormuz. In such a space, every signal matters. Every radar sweep matters. Every ambiguity can affect the decisions of ships, aircraft, commanders, insurers, and governments. The transcript frames the mission as a precision strike against Iran's naval command structure. But the deeper meaning is this. America does not need to destroy every Iranian vessel to reduce Iran's ability to threaten the strait. It can attack the systems that allow those vessels to act as a coordinated force. That is a different kind of power. A fleet without secure communications becomes reactive. A swarm without coordination becomes noise. A forward command node without reliable data becomes cautious. A commander who cannot trust his channel starts hesitating. And hesitation in a contested maritime choke point can be decisive. The Strait of Hormuz is a theater where seconds and minutes matter. A fast boat closing on a tanker needs direction. A drone tracking a convoy needs to transmit what it sees. A missile battery needs target confirmation. A commander deciding whether to escalate needs confidence that the information in front of him is current and accurate. Break that confidence, and you do not merely slow the enemy. You make the enemy doubt itself. That is the real achievement of communications denial. Not silence alone. Doubt. The source describes a small dive team moving through dark water, reaching a military cable route, and creating a failure that would leave a command node blind for a week or more. Whether read as a covert war narrative or a dramatized reconstruction, the scenario captures something true about modern conflict. The most fragile part of a sophisticated military system is often the assumption that the network will work when it is needed most. Militaries train for redundancy. They build backup channels, they encrypt radio, they use satellite links, they create alternative paths, they prepare for communications degradation. But every backup is worse than the primary channel in some way. It may be slower, less secure, more detectable, more vulnerable to interception, more dependent on weather, more vulnerable to jamming, more exposed to electronic intelligence collection. That matters enormously. If a command node loses its preferred secure cable and falls back to radio, it does not become helpless, but it becomes more visible. Its traffic patterns can be studied, its timing can be mapped, its encryption may still protect content, but metadata can reveal urgency, frequency, and coordination. Who talks to whom? How often? At what moment? After which event? Before which movement? In intelligence work, metadata can be almost as valuable as content. A message does not have to be read to be useful. Sometimes knowing that a message was sent is enough. That is why forcing an adversary off a secure undersea link and onto backup communications can be an intelligence victory as much as an operational one. The goal is not just to interrupt command. It is to make the enemy's recovery visible. When the primary path fails, the enemy adapts. That adaptation reveals structure. Which command center takes over? Which units check in? Which frequencies spike? Which backup systems activate? Which routes become active? Which commanders panic? Which nodes remain quiet? A silent cable failure can become a floodlight aimed at the enemy's hidden network. That is the kind of intelligence opportunity that cannot be created by simply blowing something up. A visible strike destroys, but it also warns. A quiet failure disrupts, then watches. This is what makes the operation so strategically elegant. The source emphasizes that the mission was designed to leave no trace. But in strategic terms, no trace does not mean no effect. It means the effect appears inside the enemy's system before the enemy understands the cause. The command node goes dark. Backup channels activate. Operators adjust. Commanders ask for status. The entire network changes shape. And somewhere else, analysts are listening. That is the hidden second half of the mission. The first half happens underwater. The second half happens in the intelligence collection system that waits for Iran to react. In that sense, the dive team is not simply cutting a cable. It is forcing the Iranian command structure to reveal itself under stress. Stress is one of the best intelligence tools. A calm military hides well. A disrupted military leaks behavior. When systems fail, people improvise. They break routine, they activate emergency links, they bypass normal protocol, they repeat messages, they make mistakes, they expose hierarchy. On a minus. That is why precision sabotage is so powerful when timed correctly. On a, it is not the physical damage alone, it is the reaction. On a, the source places the operation at night, beneath patrols, under the risk of underwater drones and surface inspections. Those details create tension, but the deeper operational concept is simple. The undersea domain is now a contested battle space. It is not empty. It is watched by sonar, drones, sensors, patrol patterns, and intelligence systems. It is no longer enough to control the air and the surface. A state that cannot understand the seabed cannot fully protect its military and economic lifelines. That is a major shift. For much of modern military history, the seabed was treated as difficult but secondary. Submarines mattered, mines mattered, cables mattered, but the public imagination still focused on ships, aircraft, and land battles. Today, the seabed is becoming a central front because so much critical infrastructure lives there. The networks that sustain modern war and modern economies run through places most people will never see. That invisibility creates vulnerability. It also creates opportunity. For a country like Iran, undersea communications can provide secure links between coastal command nodes and forward maritime positions. For a country like the United States, those same routes targets for intelligence mapping, disruption, and coercion. For NATO, undersea cables and pipelines have become a major defensive priority because hostile actors can damage infrastructure below the threshold of open war. For China and Russia, seabed operations are part of a wider competitions without triggering full-scale conflict. Over how to pressure adversaries, the Persian Gulf is therefore not an isolated case. It is a preview. The next generation of conflict will be fought across layers: space, cyberspace, air, sea surface, land, and seabed. A missile strike may dominate headlines, but a cable disruption may decide whether the missile battery receives orders. A drone swarm may appear on video, but a sensor failure may determine whether the swarm finds its target. A carrier group may project power, but undersea infrastructure may determine whether regional forces can coordinate against it. This is why the transcript story feels so compelling. It takes the drama of special operations and connects it to a strategic reality. Modern command systems are vulnerable at the physical layer. Cybersecurity is not only software. Communication security is not only encryption. Network resilience is not only digital. Everything digital eventually becomes physical somewhere. A cable, a relay, a power supply, a landing station, a seabed route, a junction box, a maintenance vessel, a sensor, a battery, a repeater. The physical layer is where the invisible world becomes attackable. That is what the mission exploits. Not brute force. Material reality. The Iranian command structure may have encryption, it may have hardened facilities, it may have redundant systems, it may have surveillance drones, but if a key communications path depends on a line lying on the seabed, then that line becomes a point of military interest. The same is true for every modern state. The United States knows this, NATO knows this, China knows this, Russia knows this, Iran knows this, and everyone is now watching everyone else's undersea lifelines. The mission's timing is also important. It is not described as an isolated act of sabotage for its own sake. It is framed as part of a broader conflict over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's naval forces rely on coordination to threaten shipping. The United States and its partners need to keep the waterway open. The stakes are global because Hormuz is tied directly to energy flows, inflation risk, and market confidence. That means a small undersea disruption can have a strategic purpose far beyond the cut itself. If Iranian fast-boat operations become less coordinated for a week, if a forward command node becomes less reliable, U.S. forces may exploit that window for patrols, escorts, strikes, or intelligence collection. If Iran has to shift to backup communications, its patterns may become more visible. If repair crews cannot prove sabotage, Tehran may hesitate to escalate publicly. A 7 to 10 day communications gap may sound small to the public. In an active military campaign, it can be enormous. A week is enough time to reposition forces. A week is enough time to run convoys. A week is enough time to collect intelligence. A week is enough time to strike other nodes. A week is enough time to force negotiations. A week is enough time to change the rhythm of a conflict. That is why the operation's scale is deceptive. 4 men, a small boat, a dark dive, a physical cable, and no explosion. On paper tiny, strategically potentially massive. This is one of the central lessons of modern war. Scale of action and scale of effect no longer have to match. A small drone can destroy a costly aircraft. A cyber intrusion can freeze a port. A single mine can halt shipping. A damaged cable can disrupt a command structure. A few minutes of confusion can create an opening for a larger operation. That is why militaries obsess over nodes. Not every target matters equally. Others connect entire networks. If you hit the right node, you do not need to hit everything else. The network reorganizes, slows, or fails. In the old model of war, the goal was often to destroy mass. Troops, tanks, ships, factories, airfields. In networked war, the goal is often to destroy connectivity. If units cannot coordinate, they become less effective, even if they physically survive. If commanders cannot see, they become cautious. If sensors cannot feed shooters, weapons sit idle. If orders cannot flow securely, the tempo collapses. Tempo is the hidden currency of war. The side that can act faster, coordinate better, and adapt sooner often wins without needing to destroy everything. The cable mission is a tempo operation. It slows one side while creating space for the other. The source emphasizes discipline. No unnecessary noise, no visible trace, no fragment left behind, no public acknowledgement. That discipline matters because covert operations are not judged only by whether the target is affected. They are judged by whether the political environment remains manageable after the effect occurs. A sloppy operation can create the same physical damage but worse strategic consequences. Evidence left behind can expose the actor. Civilian disruption can create backlash. A dramatic failure can force escalation. A captured team can become an international crisis. A visible signature can turn a deniable disruption into an act of war. That is why silence is not merely aesthetic. It is strategic protection. The cleaner the operation, the more options decision makers retain afterward. If the target fails and no one can prove why, the United States can continue other operations without immediately absorbing the diplomatic cost of a visible strike. Iran can suspect but not conclusively demonstrate. Other states can understand the message without being forced to publicly respond. This is how covert power works in a crowded geopolitical environment. On a mindset it communicates without speaking. But there is also a danger in this kind of warfare. Silent operations can become tempting because they appear low cost. If no one sees the strike, leaders may think escalation is easier. If attribution is difficult, states may push further. If gray zone tools become routine, the line between competition and war can blur dangerously. That is why undersea warfare is so destabilizing. A damaged cable may be an accident, or sabotage, or a warning, or a rehearsal, or an intelligence operation, or an act of war. The victim may not know immediately. The attacker may not admit anything. Allies may disagree over attribution. Markets may react before governments confirm facts. Military commanders may prepare responses based on incomplete evidence. In a crisis like the Persian Gulf, that ambiguity can be useful, but it can also be dangerous. Ambiguity is a weapon that can misfire. If Iran interprets a communications failure as sabotage and responds too aggressively, the conflict could widen. If the United States assumes Iran knows who did it and Iran actually does not, signals can be misread. If a civilian cable is later damaged by accident, both sides may assume hostile action. If undersea drones encounter unknown objects, commanders may overreact. The seabed is not only a battlefield, it is a fog machine. Everything is harder to see there. That is why states invest in undersea surveillance, seabed mapping, acoustic monitoring, unmanned underwater vehicles, and specialized divers. They are not only trying to attack, they are trying to know. In the undersea domain, knowledge itself is power, knowing where cables lie, knowing where sensors are placed, knowing repair timelines, knowing which systems are redundant and which are not, knowing where an enemy feels secure on a minus. The mission described in the source depends on that kind of knowledge. Before any diver enters the water, analysts would have to understand the route, the patrol timing, the nature of the cable, the nearby surveillance pattern, and the operational value of the target. The dive is the visible drama. The invisible preparation is the real foundation on a mine. Special operations are often misunderstood because the public focuses on the operator. The operator matters, of course. Skill, endurance, discipline, courage, and training are essential. But elite operators are only the final expression of a much larger system. Intelligence collection, mission planning, engineering, logistics, weather analysis, command approval, extraction planning, communication support, and contingency design. 4 men underwater are never just 4 men underwater. They are the tip of a spear built by hundreds of people the public will never see. That is why the story is not only about bravery. It is about integration. The operation works because divers, analysts, planners, technicians, commanders, and intelligence effect. The desired outcome is not damage something. It is create a temporary communications gap in a specific military channel without triggering obvious attribution, while positioning intelligence assets to exploit the forced fallback. That is a much more sophisticated objective. And it captures the difference between sabotage and strategy. Sabotage breaks. Strategy shapes. The source's mission is strategic because it shapes Iran's behavior inside a narrow window. It does not seek destruction for its own sake. It seeks a temporary but meaningful disruption. It forces adaptation. It creates intelligence opportunities. It reduces coordination. It preserves deniability. It supports larger operational goals in the Strait of Hormuz. That is why the phrase silent warfare matters. Silence here does not mean absence. It means control. On a mind's control over signature. On a mind's control over timing. On a control over attribution. On a mind control over escalation. On a control over what the enemy sees. On a control over what the enemy cannot prove. This is the kind of control militaries value most, because it gives political leaders more choices. A visible strike forces a visible response. A silent disruption creates room for decision. It can be escalated later, denied publicly, or folded into broader pressure without requiring immediate explanation. The risk, of course, is that democratic societies struggle to debate what they cannot see. Covert operations may be necessary in dangerous conflicts, but they also operate in shadows. Citizens cannot evaluate details. Legislatures may receive only classified briefings. Journalists may rely on leaks, anonymous sources, or dramatic reconstructions. That creates tension between operational secrecy and public accountability. A state needs secrecy to conduct missions like this. A democracy needs oversight to ensure secrecy does not become lawlessness. Both truths matter. In a high-stakes confrontation with Iran, the argument for covert disruption is clear. Reduce Iranian military capability without broad civilian harm, avoid public escalation, protect shipping, and create leverage. But the strategic discipline must include legal review, target discrimination, proportionality, and clear political objectives. Without those, silent warfare can become an uncontrolled habit. The transcript presents the target as military. That distinction is crucial. Undersea infrastructure often mixes civilian and military functions, which makes targeting extremely sensitive. A military-only node is one thing. A civilian cable carrying banking, hospital, aviation, or public internet traffic is something else entirely. A serious military power must know the difference and act accordingly. Precision is not only about weapons accuracy. It is about target selection. The operation's moral claim depends on that precision. It avoids civilian harm. It avoids public infrastructure. It avoids widespread disruption. It focuses on a military command channel tied to active naval operations. That is the difference between strategic communications denial and reckless infrastructure sabotage. In a world where undersea cables carry enormous amounts of civilian data, that distinction will become more important, not less. Future conflicts will test it repeatedly. States will be tempted to target cables because cables matter. But the more civilian systems depend on them, the more dangerous indiscriminate attacks become. A single cable disruption can affect markets, emergency services, communications, and public stability. Responsible targeting must therefore be narrow, justified, and tied to clear military necessity. The source's scenario is compelling because it imagines the cleanest possible version. A specific military line, a limited effect, no civilians harmed, no visible escalation. Real life is rarely that clean. But the strategic principle remains valid. The undersea domain allows states to affect military systems in ways that may be more precise than bombing, if the intelligence is good enough and the operation is disciplined enough. That is why special operations forces remain relevant even in an age of drones, satellites, artificial intelligence, and long-range precision weapons. Technology can see more than ever, strike farther than ever, and process more data than ever. But there are still missions where a human presence in the right place, at the right depth, at the right moment, can achieve something no missile can. A missile destroys loudly. A diver can alter quietly. A drone can surveil. A human can judge. A satellite can map. A trained team can touch the physical system and shape the evidence. That human element is not disappearing. It is becoming more specialized. The future special operator may not always be kicking down doors or engaging in direct action. Increasingly, he may be operating inside networks, underwater infrastructure zones, sensor fields, energy systems, and contested logistics spaces. The mission will be less about dramatic firefights and more about access, placement, denial, manipulation, extraction, and silence. That is the future the Persian Gulf points toward. Wars will still have explosions, but some of the most important actions will happen before the explosions, after them, or instead of them. The mission's final effect, 7 to 10 days of secure channel disruption, also shows how time itself becomes a target. The goal is not permanent destruction, it is temporary advantage. In many operations, temporary advantage is enough. If you need a window to move ships, conduct strikes, monitor fallback communications, force negotiations, or disrupt a coordinated attack, then a week of blindness can matter more than a year of damaged infrastructure. Permanent destruction is not always necessary. Sometimes the right temporary disruption at the right moment is more valuable. This is an important lesson for understanding the broader US-Iran conflict. Much of the campaign is likely about windows. Windows of reduced missile inventory, windows of disrupted naval command, windows of diplomatic pressure, windows when Tehran must choose between escalation and negotiation, windows when Gulf states can align publicly, windows when markets can be reassured, windows when Iran's internal factions are forced to reassess cost. A cable operation fits that logic perfectly. It creates a window. What happens inside that window is the real objective. Perhaps U.S. forces use it to track Iranian fallback channels. Perhaps shipping escorts move through the strait with less coordinated harassment. Perhaps other operations are timed around the blind spot. Perhaps negotiators press harder while Iran's command confidence is lower. Perhaps the point is simply to remind Tehran that even its hidden systems are reachable. That reminder may be the most powerful effect of all. Because once a regime realizes its undersea communications are vulnerable, it has to spend time and resources defending them. It must inspect routes, deploy more drones, reroute traffic, add monitoring systems, increase patrols, harden cable landings, reevaluate every secure line. That creates defensive burden. A single silent operation can force a long-term shift in enemy behavior. That is another way small actions create large effects. Not by destroying everything. By making the enemy defend everything. The more Iran worries about cables, the less attention it can focus elsewhere. The more it patrols underwater routes, the more predictable those patrols become. The more it adds monitoring, the more signals it emits. The more it changes communications architecture, the more chances intelligence analysts have to map the network. This is the cycle of modern intelligence conflict. Every defense creates a new signature. Every adaptation reveals a fear. Every fear reveals value. And every valued node becomes part of the next target map. A. That is why the seabed war never truly ends. Even if the shooting stops above the surface, states continue mapping, listening, probing, defending, and preparing. The cables remain, the sensors remain, the choke points remain, the energy infrastructure remains. The military command networks remain. The ocean floor becomes a permanent chessboard. The Persian Gulf is especially vulnerable because so much is compressed into a small area. Oil terminals, shipping lanes, naval bases, cable routes, pipelines, offshore platforms, patrol zones, and contested islands all exist in close proximity. That density creates opportunity and danger. It means a small operation can have outsized effect. It also means mistakes can spread quickly. That is why precision matters so much. The mission in the source works because it is narrow. It does not try to break the Gulf. It tries to affect one military channel. That is the standard future undersea operations will need to meet if they are to remain strategically useful rather than recklessly destabilizing. The public may never know how often such operations occur. That is the nature of the domain. But the consequences may appear in other ways. A sudden delay in Iranian patrol coordination, a strange pause in fast boat activity, unusual radio traffic, unexpected repair activity, a temporary shift in naval posture, or a diplomatic opening that seems to come from nowhere. In war, what appears to come from nowhere often comes from somewhere hidden. That is the point of the story. A visible battle may be shaped by an invisible event. A surface crisis may be decided below the surface. A command decision in Bandar Abbas may be changed by something that happened in dark water hours earlier. A ship may pass through the strait safely because a forward node could not coordinate a harassment package. A negotiator may face new pressure because his military counterparts suddenly lost confidence in their secure network. A regime may feel watched in places it thought were unreachable. That is what silent operations do. They change the atmosphere of decision-making. They make the enemy wonder, what else can they touch? And once that question enters the room, it never leaves. The psychological effect is enormous. A bomb tells the enemy what was hit. A silent failure makes the enemy wonder what else is failing. Is this cable old, or was it attacked? Is that drone malfunctioning, or was it manipulated? Is the backup channel safe, or already monitored? Is the repair crew being watched? Is the route compromised? Is the next failure already prepared? Uncertainty becomes pressure. Pressure becomes hesitation. Hesitation becomes opportunity. That is the sequence. This is why the most dangerous mission in the Persian Gulf may not be the loudest one. The loud missions dominate the news, but the quiet ones may set the conditions. Radar strikes, missile interceptions, naval patrols, and air operations matter, but so do the hidden actions that make those visible moves easier, safer, or more effective. The public sees the strike. It does not see the preparation that made the strike possible. The public sees the tanker pass. It does not see the communications disruption that reduced harassment risk. The public sees an Iranian statement. It does not see the command confusion behind it. The public sees diplomacy resuming. It does not see the pressure applied in dark water. That is why the story resonates. It gives shape to the invisible. It reminds us that modern warfare is not only a contest of firepower, but a contest of access. Who can reach the hidden node? Who can enter the protected system? Who can touch the infrastructure without being seen? Who can create a gap at the exact moment that gap matters most? The answer to those questions may decide conflicts before the public understands what happened. In the end, the Persian Gulf is not just a waterway. It is a layered battle space. Above it, drones and aircraft watch each other. On it, ships and fast boats maneuver. Along its coastlines, radar and missiles wait. Beneath it, cables and sensors carry the commands that make all of those systems work. Control the surface, and you influence movement. Control the air, and you influence survival. Control the seabed, and you influence the nervous system. That is why the operation described in the source matters so much. It is not only a story about Navy SEALs. It shows that in an age of satellites and hypersonics, there is still a place for men in dark water with a specific mission and no room for error. It shows that the most advanced war machines still depend on physical systems that can be reached. It shows that a great power can create strategic pressure without a public explosion. It also shows that the next war may be decided in places the public cannot see. Under the sea. Inside cables. Between signals. In the silence before a command fails. That is the real lesson. Modern warfare is not becoming less physical because it is networked. It is becoming physical in more hidden places. The digital world depends on material routes. Military networks depend on seabed lines, antennas, relays, sensors, and power. The side that understands those hidden dependencies can shape the battlefield without announcing itself. In the Persian Gulf, that may be exactly what happened. A command node went dark. A secure channel disappeared. A repair report may have called it fatigue. A patrol network may have slowed. Backup radios may have lit up. Intelligence assets may have listened. And on the surface, the water looked unchanged. That is the art of silent warfare. No explosion.